So over here, we're gonna hear the story of someone pretty incredible that worked with the company for 44 years, which is amazing. So are we all ready to have some fun? Yes? So if you're ready to have some fun, I need you to do me a favor, okay? I need you to clap your hands, make a lot of noise for the incredible show-stopping Rob Morton!
These introductions are getting fancier and fancier. I'm standing over there. Well, who is she introducing? Is there somebody coming up here before me? Oh, wow. So, good morning. So, you'll notice I'm wearing a little bling today, and I want to take this opportunity. How many participated in the 5K at sea? This is what you're going to get this afternoon. I got the first one. But I wanted to take the opportunity. So there's a significance to me for me to have this medal. I never liked to run, and for some reason when we lived overseas, it's going for long walks wasn't a good idea when you have children at home that you need to spend time with. So we lived on a little hill, and I ran to the bottom of the hill, and after a while I started doing it, and I really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed being outside, and it's kind of become an obsession. It has become an obsession of mine, and I've literally run a 5K just every day for the last 5 years, and it's something well, thank you. Wendy's trying to look for any excuse for me to stop. But I only have 3 medals. The first one was on the Disney Dream last year because, like Gwendolyn, somebody took the time and made the effort to organize it and bring it all together. And I got my second one on Castaway Cay a few days ago, and my third one right here. This is by far the best. It's my favorite. But let's give it up for Gwendolyn and everyone who has helped her pull this together. It's very, very special to be able to do that. So, I know what you want me to talk about, but it's going to be a minute. Now, first of all, I thought it would be easiest. We're going to talk about the 90s. It's known as the Disney decade. And the reality is we can spend the next 45 minutes talking about this. Yeah. Okay. So this this was the microcosm of the world in 1996 because I heard, oh, I love that. The same thing in the same response. There was a love-hate relationship with this for the 25th anniversary. And I remember one of the, I didn't work in the Magic Kingdom when this happened, but one of the challenges of this was that we had recently opened a wedding chapel over by Disney's Grand Floridian that had a window that overlooked the Magic Kingdom with the castle in the background.
Oh no.
So you can imagine that there were some interesting conversations by those who were planning weddings during the time that this was happening. So if nothing else, I put this up here to make sure you're awake as we move forward. All right, so once again, I'll put this up here just for a moment. This is a snapshot. If there's anybody here for the first time, thank you very much. When we were together in the last session, the first session, I kind of took you up to a point where I had that spring break job at Pirates of the Caribbean, and suffice to say, spring break's going very well at the time. I continued to work at the Jungle Cruise and then got promoted, surprisingly. Helped to open Epcot Center, went over, worked in transportation for 4 years, and then right before we left, I had followed a former leader. This one was not named Mary, but we'll probably come back to Mary in a little bit, to oversee the World Showcase Fellowship Program. So that was an administrative role. It was coordinating a learning experience, primarily learning experiences for this group of international cast members. And it was so much fun because we would help them teach about their own cultures, but we would also take them into the community. We would take them to the courthouse and we would watch trials. We even took them to the jail. This was a really smart thing to do at the beginning of their program so they could see what they didn't want to see again. And so that was a really interesting time for me because I was being asked to bring people together to share their cultures, and I'd never been anywhere other than like the Bahamas. It might have been to Mexico or Jamaica, I can't remember, but at the most, right? I'd never been anywhere. And one of my responsibilities early on was to teach these folks from basically 11 different countries coming together about American culture and listening to their stereotypes of what was good and maybe what was perceived to be not so good about American culture. And one of the things I remember at that time was, I don't know if it was Newsweek time, but one of the big magazines had posted an article where they had tested basically high school seniors from around the world about their knowledge of the United States, and that the students outside of the United States scored significantly higher than graduates inside the United States. And so we did a little activity where we gave them a blank map of the United States and said, could you do your best, fill out, identify as many states on this blank map as you possibly can. Invariably, they outperformed what the American high school students had done. And I just said, oh wow, there's some work to do, but then I need to do a lot to learn about other countries if I'm going to be credible standing up and talking to them. So that was really my first exposure to the international, other cultures, and starting that journey of learning. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about catching the travel bug. At this moment, it's going to start this passion about travel, whether it be personal or for business. I do want to share my experience opening Euro Disney and a couple of stories there. I promised you a real princess story. You're going to get it. My time in Epcot Center Guest Relations, and then joining the Disney Institute, at least initially. We're going to talk more about the Disney Institute tomorrow. Now, a couple of you may have lost some sleep because of how I ended yesterday's session when I said I met Wendy on her first day and I picked her up in a parking lot in an unmarked white van. And that is 100% true. But I owe it to her and I owe it to all of you to say there's a little bit more to the story. Wendy had actually been selected to be American representative to the World Showcase Fellowship Program. She had traveled the world with the organization Up With People before that, so very well traveled, and she was coming in along with two others that would represent the United States. And my boss and probably somebody else were picking up the three Americans at the parking lot of the apartment complex so we could all go to the airport to pick up the 10 Japanese fellowship students that were arriving. So if I told you all that, that's boring. But it was very innocent, and but that was the first time that we ever met. And over time, we recognized that there was a little bit of a spark, and some things happened, and in 1990 it led to this. Oh. So some of you are and some of you are going, but love the picture. But a couple of things I want to point out on the top right, you'll notice some accessories there. This is one of those Disney weddings before there were a lot of Disney weddings. It wasn't over the top, but it was ever present. And two of my groomsmen, on the left is my friend Jeff, who I met working in monorail operations. And what's that? No, we're not going to talk about that anymore. So Jeff was actually, he was my roommate. He was living in my house when Wendy and I got married, and we had to kick him out. But he was a good sport. Now lives out near Las Vegas, and he has the same challenge that my brother has, in that he has a wife with horses. So I don't know that he will ever retire. That's the challenge that he had. And then on the right side is my friend Steve, who's now David, because Steve, after Disney, became a rabbi and changed his name. But he was the first friend that I met when I worked at Disney. And we're still friends today. And we just went to a 65th birthday party last August, and it's just so special to make those connections. And that's one of the things that when you work at Disney for a long time, you meet people and you don't forget them. And in some cases you stay very closely connected, in some cases you drift apart and then you come back together. But it's a very special part of that. So this was also around the time that I got my first business trip ever. And part of the World Showcase Fellowship program at the end of their year is we would take them, take all the students, in this case it was about 50, up to Washington, D.C. And we did a lot of special events, and we get to talk to maybe a representative from Florida. Every once in a while you get really lucky and you talk to some really high level folks. And then we go to New York City. So they would experience what that was like, and we go to a Broadway play, and we visit the Statue of Liberty, and all of these things that you would hope to do in New York. And this is also one of those moments of realization about the significance of this. And we were right here, and Wendy got to go on this trip. This picture, I think, was taken right after we were married. And you're looking down Broadway. Times Square is right down there. You've got the Cats at the Winter Garden Theater right there. And the lobby of this hotel was up on like the 7th floor. So that's where we are. We're looking out. I think we just handed out the room keys to everybody. And I looked over, and one of our fellowship students from Hong Kong was looking out, and tears were streaming down his face. And at first I'm thinking, okay, something's wrong. And I went up, are you okay? And he just looked at me. He goes, this is America. His whole life, that was what he was told America was. And he'd been at Walt Disney World for a year, and it ain't this. So it was this moment of how important that was. So that was my first ever business trip. Now, soon after this, I was asked if I would go on a recruiting trip to help identify other cultural representatives to come and work at Epcot Center, and so that led to my first international business trip. And you can't really tell here, maybe you can if you're far away. This is Germany. We go to Germany and we get a Mercedes. I thought I was the king of the world until we got on the Autobahn and were passed by BMWs that you couldn't even see. They were moving so fast, so quickly. But we had a chance to go and visit a little bit. So we were in Germany and Morocco to do these recruiting trips. There was so much interest and desire for folks. They would show up, in some cases, the day before to line up for a chance to interview with us. In Morocco, I remember we'd show up and there was a line literally around the block. And all of us, unfortunately, had a little bit of the food, let's say we had a foodborne illness and we were having a tough time and we just wanted to go lie down, but you couldn't, how could we couldn't let them down. They were here and they had so much excitement, so much passion, and wanted to come, and even for just 6 months or a year to be a part of moving to the United States and representing their countries at Epcot Center. It was very powerful. And then from Germany to Morocco, and then from Morocco, before we headed home, we stopped here. And that was the first time that I'd ever seen the Eiffel Tower. And this has become very significant, and as we talk about Euro Disney and so forth, you'll make those connections in those moments. But it's powerful. And we walked from our hotel. We stayed at the same hotel, and I don't know why we didn't just stay by the airport, because that's all we were doing. But the recruiter that I was traveling with made the effort, so she wanted me to have a real international experience. So both times we walked down, and we were able to get this view of the Eiffel Tower. And soon after that, as would happen, because remember, I've now moved from Main Street Adventureland to bus operations to monorail operations to the World Showcase Fellowship Program. And the problem with being in an admin role, being backstage, now the good part is I had weekends off mostly, and that was awesome. But that was not my ticket to move up. If I wanted to get promoted, I was told at that time that I needed to, quote, pound the pavement, which basically meant I needed to go back out into the park so that I am doing real operational type things and I could get noticed. And so I moved to Future World Attractions at that time, and this is Future World 1991, so all of the original Future World pavilions were there, all of the original soundtracks were there. I got trained on every single attraction, and I was trained to deliver the live spiel on the Listen to the Land. It was called Listen to the Land then, not Living with the Land, boat ride at the Land Pavilion. So I was always very proud of that. I said, well, this ain't the Jungle Cruise, but it was. And right after I joined, now when I went back to Future World Attractions, I got to work for Mary again. This is the one who called me and told me I was promoted and was my first manager before. And she always looked out for me, and I've always appreciated that. She was a straight shooter. She had a very colorful vocabulary, but it was so much fun, and I had a great deal of loyalty and commitment to her because of how she had taken care of me. And so she recommended me for another opportunity, which is to go over to Euro Disney to help open. And this was not there. We had teams that were over there for months and months and years. This was to be part of the grand opening task force. And because there was a lot of events that happen when you are going to be opening something that's that massive. And unlike being at Walt Disney World, when we opened, say, Disney MGM Studios, we had a lot of people who had done it before, and we had a lot of people that it's like we knew each other, we knew the steps that had to be taken, we knew the commitment it was going to take and the hard work it was going to require, and we were all good. But in Paris, there was nobody who had been through this before. So we needed to go over, and my role was very similar to what it was for the opening of the Disney MGM Studios, which was wrangling buses and getting people, especially invited press and celebrities and everything, to and from all of the places that they needed to be. The challenge in Paris, though, one of the challenges in Paris was we weren't taking care of people who were arriving at a single airport and bringing them to their hotel. We were dealing with 2 airports and 5 train stations. And so we had to get everybody to there. There were days that we had several hundred buses circling around that property any one day. The grid that we had was unbelievable, and back then we didn't have fancy computer programs that would help us manage that, so we were doing it all by hand. And then we had to get them to and from all of the events, and then we had to get them back to the 2 airports and the 5 train stations at the end of it all. It was interesting that my role was everything that happened at every hotel. We had 6 hotels there, I'll come back to that, and I had to have somebody at every hotel. We found that our French counterparts didn't really relate to the fact that we needed somebody there 20 hours a day. So most of the folks that worked with me were individuals that had been working on, I had a construction manager, I had a project manager from the construction time that stayed over to help out. We were really desperate, and somebody that I had met previously showed up for the he just wanted to be there for the grand opening, and he was on vacation. And we said, oh man, I wish you could work. He goes, I'll make a deal. I'll cancel my vacation, I'll work 20 hours a day for you, but you have to relieve me so I can go and watch the grand opening. We made a deal, we delivered upon it, and every time I see Hugh these days, we talk about that same story. It was he worked hard, and I almost forgot to go and relieve him for the thing, but he reminded me. I had a counterpart there because, again, part of what we were doing is training the local team so that when they have future big events, they were going to be able to take care of it. I was paired with the general manager of the golf resort. And so I don't know why, but they just said, okay, this is the guy, teach him everything that you know. So that 5 minutes was over, and then we spent most of our time, okay, maybe not most of our time, a lot of our time arranging golf outings for Don Johnson. Because he and Melanie Griffith were the hosts of that, and so we were spending an inordinate amount of time arranging helicopters and everything else so that Don Johnson could play golf every day. So that was a big part of it. This is where I lived. It was a trailer. It looks a lot like Fort Wilderness if you've been there. This was located right across the street from, it's kind of like there's, instead of Interstate 4 like at Walt Disney World, you had the A4, and this was on the other side. Beautiful campground facility we had there. That's where I lived. We were still there. We got there early enough to where we were still hard-hatting around the park and seeing different things. But one of the things I remember, that every day driving from the property across to my trailer, some days I never made it back to the trailer, were one of the unique challenges that existed, and one of the reasons that the Sleeping Beauty Castle looks the way that it does at Disneyland Paris is that it needed to be really fanciful. It couldn't really resemble a real castle like what we have at Disneyland or even Walt Disney World, being inspired by real castles. Because the challenge is that France has real castles. And every day when I drive back and forth, I would pass this castle on the side of the road. Okay, it doesn't look like much. It is a small castle, but it's a castle. But they were everywhere, and I said, well, you can't, you really, I always thought that was a cool thing, is they really went out of their way to create something that was very storybookish, as opposed to trying to replicate what was there. Working, it was challenging. Understanding French business culture, trying to operate with a sense of urgency because we knew how much we had to get done, and overcoming those challenges and working unbelievably long hours. When I say 18, 20 hours a day on a good day. We were exhausted, we were frustrated, and I got to a point about a month before opening that I would have given anything to go home. And I say, if I had the option, I would have just said, okay, I'm done, I can't do this anymore. But what that would have meant, I wouldn't go back to my old job that they were holding for me, but at that point I would have had to leave. So that was an extreme. So we were just all frustrated. We felt kind of trapped, and we were. One day, a Sunday, we had a half day off. We had to be back by like 3 or 4 o'clock for a meeting, but we took the morning and we went into Paris and we went to the Louvre. Because we all wanted to go and see the Mona Lisa and other artwork. But I made a mistake that day because some of the cultural challenges were that Disney was not well perceived in Paris at that time. We had actually been warned not to wear anything Disney related because we would be at risk. And I'm wearing a Disney sweatshirt with a ski jacket. We get inside the museum and we start to walk around, and they had cranked the heat up. And I'm miserable. So I went and saw the Mona Lisa, and at least back then it wasn't me taking pictures of a bunch of cell phones taking pictures. It was a little bit more legit. And I said, I can't take this, but I can't take my jacket off either because I've got this Disney thing on underneath. So I went for a walk. And if you've been to Paris, right next to the Louvre is this bridge. It's the Pont des Arts, and anybody who speaks French is thinking Rob can't speak French, and you are right. That was my best stuff. But it's a pedestrian bridge. The day it was cloudy, it was kind of misty and cool, and I'm moping along and just feeling really bad for myself. And then I stopped at a point on the bridge, and I looked in one direction, and I saw that. Except it was cloudy and rainy, and it was illuminated. And I turned around at the same moment on the same place on the bridge, and it's hard to see here, Those are the two towers of Notre Dame. And I had one of those moments that you can never plan for, but you always hope that you're going to get. And I always describe it as like something came out of the sky and smacked me in the face and said, look where you are. And you're getting to do something that people would give anything to be able to do. And you're upset and you're frustrated, and this is a dream come true, and you should live it like it's a dream come true. And I will tell you, from that moment, I was fine. I was still tired, but I was fine. And this moment has been so significant to me, and I've been back. This is not a brag, it's just because when we did a lot of work in Paris, and I got to do a lot of it, I've probably been there close to 50 times. And every single time I've gone to stand on that bridge. And I recount that, and I feel bad for anybody who's with me, because then they get this whole nonsense story again about how, all of those things, but it was so significant. And I always say that bridge saved my career, because I really wanted to leave, but I had that moment that reminded me that you get to do this. And what I've carried through over the years, as I've traveled with other people, especially as they are beginning their business travel journey, I said, you got to stop wherever you are. It doesn't matter. It can be Des Moines, Iowa. It doesn't matter. Stop and look around and say, look how lucky you are to be here. There's a lot of people who would wish to be doing what you're doing. And if we have that mindset, it just changes how we think about it. It doesn't become the burden that it once was. Did we have some fun there? Yes, we did. They let me go out and test drive the antique vehicles. Well, so much for judgment. Anyway, as we were wrapping up our time together, we had a big party, a big celebration, and as you can imagine, there was some great food, there was entertainment that we all put together, and there were beverages. I snapped a picture of this, and it's hard to see on the picture, but what caught my attention and what amused me was that the Budweiser cases were stamped imported. And I'd never felt so fancy having a Budweiser in my life. So we did that, and then when I look back at it, people say, well, how do you feel about your experience there? And the way I always describe, I'm very thankful to have been a part of it, but I said it was a wonderful thing to have done. And but to this day, it's my favorite park with the castle, and we go back, and I mentioned on the first session, we're going to go back again here after the cruise. So I took Wendy back the next year, and I was very excited to show her what was going on and everything that we had worked on, and to take her everywhere. Before this picture was taken, though, we took a walk around the resort hotels, and we went to the Newport Bay Club. Huge hotel. But I was disappointed I couldn't take her inside because it was closed. How do we know it was closed? Because somebody had handwritten on a piece of paper with a Sharpie or whatever that said closed for season, and taped it to the door crookedly. And that was the beginning of some of the challenges that Euro Disney had. So here's my take on some of the challenges at Euro Disney. Number one, I blame it on Tokyo. I blame a lot of it on Tokyo. You go, Ron, what does that have to do? It's on the other side of the world. From the moment Tokyo Disney opened, it was successful. It was a home run. And I have to believe that somewhere in Disney, people are saying, well, if it works in Asia, Western Europe can't be a problem. Yeah, so anyway, I think that was part of it. It gave us whatever terms you want to use, overconfidence, arrogance, whatever that is, but I think that was part of it. I do believe that names matter. Originally, it was opened as Euro Disney. It did not take too long to rename it to Disneyland Paris, and having that connection to its proximity to the city of Paris, it's 30 minutes away by train. It really helped. You can stay at Disney and visit Paris. You can stay in Paris and visit Disney, and I do believe that made a big difference. There were a number of cultural challenges, not only in the way people worked, but Disney had a rule at that time that if the park has a castle, there will be no alcoholic beverages served. We're in France. We're in Paris. And that went on for a while. It was, I think kind of a significant thing in that this battle, this cultural battle between Disney and Paris, that we were just not willing to, it took a long time before we gave up on that. And I don't know all the decision making that went into it. But I'll tell you a funny story. Back in 1999, Wendy and I had gone skiing down in Switzerland. Okay, I won't go into the full story, but we actually found it was cheaper to go to Switzerland to go skiing than to go from Florida to Colorado to go skiing. So we went to Switzerland. Anyway, on our last day, we drove from the Alps, hightailing it on the French highways through toll. I think we had a $75 toll we hit at one point, so that we could get back to Disneyland before it closed, so that we could have dinner at the restaurant at Pirates of the Caribbean and have a drink, because that had never happened before. And so we made it our way all the way back there. One of the other I mentioned earlier, we had 6 hotels. We created a destination and a part of the world that nobody travels to a destination if it's not August. So in reality, a lot of the challenges were that they overbuilt it was a hotel issue, not a park issue. And so keeping the hotels occupied, and that's where they really started trying to generate business, conventions and those types of things to come, and that's become a very successful business for them. But this idea of having 6 hotels, and they modeled it after Walt Disney World. We're going to have all these hotels, and everybody's going to come, and they're going to stay here for a long time, and that didn't work. And then the last thought is the challenges that we had here paid off in that we listened to those challenges. We learned from those challenges. And so I look forward to sharing with you later on some examples of what did we do in our next park in Hong Kong that were a direct result of the lessons that we learned here. And I think, everything happens for a reason. You can look back and you can second guess everything. Over time, fast forward a little bit, in 2017, because originally this was owned by a European company. Disney was a 40% owner in that company, but we did not have controlling interest. And over time, challenges with investments and all of this, I'll tell you some other stories later. But in 2017, Disney assumed full ownership and control, and every time that we've been back since then, it's gotten better and better and better. And those of you that are going after this cruise, I think you should absolutely look forward to it, because it's becoming the experience it was intended to be. Took a while, but glad you're able to do that. So I went back home, and I went back to Future World Attractions, and here's me on the land boat ride. And normally the cast members on the land boat ride did not wear a tie, but we had a competition during a very busy week, and the land had won, and so we had to go and take place of the cast members so that they could go eat pizza. One of the other favorite attractions there was the Universe of Energy. I just thought it was lovely, except it was very sensitive. And it break down all the time. One at the times, not just once, multiple times, we had to shut down the universe, or it shut down on its own, because the space shuttle was landing and there were sonic booms. You can imagine that. So this obviously, I know a lot of us missed this. Guardians of the Galaxy Cosmic Reruns, pretty cool though. All right. I got to work on a very special project, which was the Innoventions. It was a future product showcase that overtook Communicore at that time. I was excited because I got to wear jeans. Everybody wears jeans every day now. It's not a big deal. Back then, it was a big deal. And then we traveled around with, there's companies that were building their exhibits. We had to travel. Okay, wait, I'm traveling again. All over the United States to where all of these things are being fabricated, and I had our safety experts with us, and we were inspecting them and doing all of those things, and that opened in 1994. So I got to be on the project team with WDI, but I didn't actually get to say I was an Imagineer. I really wanted one of those brown Imagineering hard hats and with my name on it, but I didn't get one. If anybody has any connections, let me know. I shared in my last session I'd had a starring role at Disney MGM Studios. I was in the guidebook, and you know what? They must have been really impressed by that, because they came back to me again and they asked me if I would be part of another photo shoot. This is internal. This is the Disney look. This is all of the guidelines about how you're supposed to look every single day, and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And I had the reputation at this time, again still in Future World, that I wore a suit every day. Now some of you are thinking, oh, Rob's got some style. No, Rob was practical. I learned that if you wear a suit every day, you only have to iron the front of your shirt. And there I am. Hey, look how cool! I'm so cool with this, with that big brick radio, looking over my shoulder like that. But I grew out of that suit thing after a while. But yes, so I am immortalized in the Disney lookbook of that period of time, and of course that has evolved. You know, the Disney look was something, you know, we've always taken seriously, and I remember in the early 2000s they changed it where you could have a mustache, and we'd always argued, well, Walt had a mustache, and that was kind of a big deal, but you couldn't grow it at work. You had to go away somewhere and then grow it and then come back. Okay, I don't know about you, other guys in here. It takes me longer than that to do. Later on, we were overseas and we got a notification that they were now going to allow full facial hair, full beards. And it was very professionally done. It looked like an official announcement, but I was convinced somebody was pranking me. But Wendy had always kind of encouraged me to grow a beard, because every time I went on vacation, I would not shave, and it would do that. I would try it. And I found out it was legit when we had come back to the U.S. and we went on vacation. I'd grown a beard. I got ready to go into work and backed out of the driveway, and then went back into the driveway, went back into the house and shaved, because I just couldn't do it. But over time, there may be some pictures here before we finished the cruise of me with the beard and everything. So I did my last few years. I took advantage of that, but it took a lot. It was almost painful because you're so ingrained in this. I promised you a princess story. When you think of a princess that was very well known in the 1990s, got a lot of attention, who comes to mind? Well, that was unanimous. Guess who this story is about? So Princess Diana and William and Harry came to Walt Disney World for a visit, and I will say that I didn't interact with her a lot, but she was lovely, and I was particularly impressed with William and Harry and how polite that they were, and so appreciative of everything that we were doing for them. But I was part of the team that was organizing the visit, and my job specifically at Epcot Center was, interestingly, running ahead and looking out for paparazzi. And if there was somebody gathering, because that was a challenge, so I'd go ahead, I'd make sure the path was clear. If it wasn't, we would find an alternative way to get to wherever we were going. Well, we're walking through Epcot Center, and I was notified that the party requested a restroom break. And so you don't take that party to just a guest restroom. I happened to have the magic key that opened every door, and one of the doors that I happened to open was for the Kodak VIP lounge. Now I knew this lounge well because Wendy worked there as the concierge for 13 years, and she was working there, but this was at night, so she wouldn't do it. But if you are at the front of the Imagination Pavilion, you walk up the path like you're going to the Magic Eye Theater, and then you go all the way around past the exit. There's a walkway that goes up, and then there's a lounge that looks like this. Okay, it was furnished in the 70s, so let it go. All right, so I'm thinking, all right, I've got the key. I take them in. Everyone in the party used the restroom. And I went home and I told Wendy, I said, I'm so sorry you weren't there today, but we took Princess Diana and the princes and the group, and we used the restroom in your lounge. And she's looking at me. She goes, Rob, you don't understand. In the women's restroom, there is only one stall. So therefore, after that day, the Kodak VIP Lounge was home to a royal throne. She was, Wendy has a photo album. She met so many different celebrities as they came through, and they would provide access to, I think it was Captain EO back then, and when one of the rules at Disney is that if you're around celebrities, you never ask for a photograph. But she was working for Disney, but on loan to Kodak. Kodak seemed to give them license to do whatever they wanted. All right. Around the same time, something else happened that was known as performance excellence. This was the band, and this was the branding of it. And I have shared some previous stories about what it was like, and when it was kind of autocratic, and it wasn't uncommon for you to get yelled at, and all of these things. And I just want to reiterate, that worked for a long time. But in the mid-90s, we started getting like survey results that weren't trending the way that we really wanted them to do. Now, in the old way, if our guests are saying they're not quite as happy, the tendency might have been we need to work harder, and we would go and start kicking people in the behind. But okay, in this case, we had a leader at the time named Judson Green. He was the president of Walt Disney Attractions, who took a different approach, and they did the research to understand what was really happening. And they were able to prove with hard data that in those business units that had highest levels of guest satisfaction also had the highest levels of cast member satisfaction. Makes sense? And those with the highest level of cast member satisfaction was directly correlated to leaders demonstrating certain behaviors. These will not surprise you. Listening, coaching versus reprimanding, giving people decision-making authority, providing an opportunity to be empowered, and recognition. And we shifted our approach to focus on those types of behaviors, and it was the most significant cultural change that I experienced there, and there's been a lot of them, but that really changed the focus to the critical importance as the role of leaders as opposed to the role of managers to inspire cast members to deliver an experience. It was around the same time that I had been promoted because I had pounded the pavement, and I went to guest relations at Epcot Center. Those are some kind of old pictures of the World Key. This is the latest, the lobby that they just updated, and it's gorgeous. My office was in that window up above the logo. That was cool. But I didn't do that for a very long time. It wasn't my favorite thing because, unfortunately, as the manager of guest relations, when you talk to guests, a lot of the guests that you're talking to have talked to somebody else and they're not happy about something, and then you're having to deal with it. But one of the things we did work on, and this was part of performance excellence, was a mindset shift that we don't need to be the controllers of everything. We don't need to be the police. We just need to understand that there are sometimes challenges that we're responsible for, there's challenges that we're not, and we adopted this philosophy. Whoops. Is this idea of it may not be our fault, but it is our problem. And I think that has served us well, and it really does encapsulate, I'll give you an example. It may not be our fault that people can't remember where to park the car. Because we tell you over and over again, remember where you park the car. And now there's an app, and we're lazy. But in the old days, we on the back end, we had somebody on a map that were writing down exactly what time we parked every single row in the parking lot. So you may not remember what color your rental car is, but if you can tell us about what time you got there, we'll get you to your car. Okay, so that's a simple example of that type of philosophy. While I was at guest relations, I kept a promise. I shared earlier that in the early 1980s, I made this decision, this grand plan of going to school part-time and working full-time, and what a great idea that was. My mother never thought that was a great idea. And I had always promised her that I would finish my degree, and I did. and she was able to come and be part. It was actually I went to classes on Disney property, paid by Disney, and our graduation was at the American Adventure. And it was so cool. But I was excited. I kept my promise, and no more school for me. I'll come back to that. Okay. Anybody remember this one? One of the attractions when I worked in Future World, fantastic experience. I do miss this one. Test Track has been very cool, but man, I miss this attraction. In January of 1996, it shut down to make way for Test Track, the original version of Test Track. I was the park duty manager that night, and I went over there, and as you can imagine, there were a lot of guests and Disney adults, even though we didn't call them that at that time, that were in line because they wanted to be the last to ride the attraction. Unfortunately, something happened, and one of the members of the General Motors team that tried to sell you a car after you rode the attraction, they wanted to ride too, and they come around and they jumped across the track, kicked the sensor, shut everything down, and we had to evacuate the attraction before the last ride. And as a result, I have the distinction of being the last operational cast member to ever walk through that attraction before it shut down, because they were there. They had bulldozers and bobcats out back waiting for us to leave so they could start demolition. It was that big. So guess what happened next? I followed a former, this was a former colleague, not a former leader, and I had mentioned being part of the youth education series. This was my first stint. This was actually part of what was going to become the Disney Institute, and we provided educational programs to school students. For years we had welcomed bands performing, choral groups and all that. They would come and they get to perform in the park. But for the academic side, we would have primarily middle school and high school. They would come, and we would have with very strong curriculum standards programs. And this is an example. We would take them to Space Mountain, let them ride it with the lights off, and then we'd turn the lights on, they'd ride it again, and they would compare their perceptions. And they would talk about potential and kinetic energy, and they would talk about the role of light and how that can play. It almost sound like I know what I'm talking about. Down here you see the ballroom scene at the Haunted Mansion. That is created by science. Very simple science. Google Pepper's ghost if you want to know how to do it. I can create ghosts on my back lanai at my house. But we would actually take them behind the scenes and show them exactly how we create these special effects through the filter of what science and the science of reflection and scrims and other things that would enable us to bring this to life. I was very fortunate. Barb, where are you? Oh, there you are, right there. Barb came up and introduced herself after the first session as a former youth education series facilitator and facilitated these programs. So if you really want a good answer, talk to Barb, because I'm kind of limited on that. So we were part of the Disney Institute. The Disney Institute is a brand, started in 1996. That was a campus where you could go, and it was personal enrichment programs. Learn to cook with a Disney chef. Learn to take pictures with a Disney photographer. Learn to draw with a Disney animator. They were fantastic, and we were part of that. It gave us a lot of classroom space and all of these other things that we love. The challenge with that concept was that everybody who took those courses loved them, rated them off the charts, but we never cracked the code as to how to get enough people to take them, because it was a very pricey endeavor. We brought in some of the best academic experts in the world to oversee these things, and just never really worked. But we're now part of the Disney Institute. I knew a lot about the Disney Institute because they would bring their professional development programs, like Disney's approach to quality service, and they would come to Future World when I was there. I was a guest speaker. I was a local expert. I'd talk about how we operated Body Wars at the Wonders of Life. Then we get to go back and we'd have breakfast with them and answer questions, and I thought that was fantastic. And they recruited me. They said, you need to come be a facilitator. You need to come be a part of this. And I I just didn't do it because I couldn't overcome this. I was afraid to audition because I'm auditioning in front of people who do it all the time. Now some of you are thinking, but Rob, you were at the Jungle Cruise. When I was in high school, I was Captain Von Trapp in The Sound of Music. But when it came to sharing somebody else's words, it was intimidating. I enrolled and withdrew from public speaking courses in college 4 times. And so I didn't do it. So what happened? I had my role at the Youth Education Series, but that evolved. That role went away, and I thought about, well, should I try to audition? I could not bring myself to do it. So I was given a role doing all of the financial planning, budgeting. You know, it was a finance role. I was the finance guy at the Disney Institute. It was a role that I was really good at because all of the academics that we had brought in couldn't add up anything. So I did all that work for them, and it was good, but I was good at it. I didn't like it, but I kind of persevered through. But something cool happened while I was there. I got my ring. And the day that I got my ring, here's what happened. I was kidnapped. I showed up for work on the morning of my anniversary, and they grabbed me, and they threw me in the back of, maybe not, but they put me in a car, and they drove me to the Disney University. And we walked in to a Disney Traditions class full of brand new cast members. And they presented me with my pin and my 20-year ring in front of all of these new cast members. And then I got to try to explain to them, this is what can happen to you, and half of them left. But it was that, you know, the effort that went through, and they made it so significant. And I was getting to the point, now this was going to be, this ring was a possibility, and for me to be able to get that, and then for them to make it so special. I got other service awards later that I'm going to talk about, and if you think that's a good story, you ain't heard nothing yet. And then the last thing that happened in the 90s, the very last thing, I mean, that for any of us, we had an issue in that we were dealing with this thing called Y2K. And so for months, if not years, we were trying to figure out, okay, with the computer coding, what's going to happen? Are we going to be able to continue to operate? And I don't think that, I think we're doing pretty good, but we were not taking any chances. And so on New Year's Eve, 1999, we were going to make sure that if things happen, we think it's going to be okay, but we don't know, and if things happen and we lose power and all that, what are all the worst things that could happen? Let's plan for that. My job that night, I wanted to be celebrating. Like everybody that was around then wanted to celebrate. My job was to guard this. A swimming pool at the Treehouse Villas next to the golf course, to make sure that if the power went out, nobody would fall in the pool in the dark. Now, as luck would have it, my wife, she took mercy. She felt bad for me, and I was there with one of my colleagues, and we were making the best of it. And right before midnight, we snuck out onto the adjacent tee box. I think it was for the 18th hole at the Buena Vista golf course, and we could get a view of Pleasure Island at that time, and they were going to have fireworks, so we were able to kind of watch the fireworks. And all of a sudden, Wendy drives up with a friend of hers, comes out with a bottle of sparkling grape juice, and we were able to toast the new year, which was a really fun experience. But yeah, that's how I ended the 1990s. All right, let's look ahead. What are we doing tomorrow? Tomorrow we are shifting into the 2000s, and I look forward to sharing with you what I view as the greatest honor of my career. I'm going to share some reflections from September 11th and what happened that day in the parks and in the time immediately following that. How did I overcome my greatest fear and actually step on stage for the Disney Institute? Some of the most magical moments they're going to involve more service awards. And I'm also going to share with you just a little snapshot, because Disney Cruise Line, when we're talking about, okay, Rob, what are you going to talk about? And then I was talking about, I spent 20 years at the Disney Institute. I got a lot of stuff. And they said, don't teach the okay, tomorrow for 15 minutes, I'm going to try to teach you something. Okay, but I want to give you a feel for what what some of the key elements are, and what is it that is at the essence of what Disney does to endeavor to provide a high quality, consistent guest experience, and how can that be transferred to other industries and other organizations. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of a feel for that. We'll have some fun with it, but I think it's important. And if anybody in your own business is interested in chatting about it, I'll certainly answer any questions later on, and then we'll put you in contact with the right people. So that's into the commercial. And then the global travel started to kick off. So we're going to start shifting into a little bit of travelogue kind of fun stuff to be able to share with you. But that's it. That's the plan. That's the 1990s. Thank you very much. See you tomorrow.